in 1997, the Tories were 12.5 points behind Labour. Again, if the polls are correct, they're somewhere between sort of 16 and 22 points behind at the moment. So clawing back to, what was still a catastrophic defeat in 1997 for the Conservatives would now likely be seen as a good result. And there's a sort of perverse situation with all of these models showing Labour on course for majorities of 200-300 that a 1997 result could be seen as somewhat of a disappointment on election night.
Is the question of raising taxes the great bogeyman of British politics? Or actually, as some polling suggests, would you be happy with increased taxes if you felt it could be spent properly? Now, of course, that's a big if, isn't it? Keith says, if 200 quid a year tax rise will help improve public services, then sign me up. But no politician seems to think that people actually think that, do they?
Yeah.
Because no one ever wants to admit to tax rises, apart from parties who have no sign of ever getting in.
Yeah. And surely, speaking in a kind of hypothetical situation, if the situation is so bad after a long period of, a different government, something has to give.
Something's going to be different.
Yeah.
Phil says, many voters say they're happy to have tax increases until they impact upon them personally. I think that's probably true, but where do you stand on that? The Tories are going to say Labour are going to tax you high. Does that put you off, actually? 87222, start your message with the word Times. You can, if you want to text us, you can WhatsApp us, 0333 003 2353. So what is the overwhelming political mood of the country at the moment? Utter futility seems to be the answer coming out of focus groups. It's as though the public are channeling Samuel Beckett. We are all waiting for an election. I can't go on. I'll go on by talking to Luke Tryl from More in Common. He's been talking to people across the UK. Good morning to you, Luke.
Good morning.
A bit of Samuel Beckett acting to put people off this morning. Is it as bad as that? Because this election has lots of factors in it. It's a summer election. There's an election with one party with a massive poll lead that doesn't seem to shift. Is it a sense of a plague on everyone's houses when you're talking to people?
I'm afraid it is a little bit like that. I mean, there's no doubt, and it won't surprise you to know that you talk to people in focus groups, and there's been a complete loss of faith in the Conservatives. And I think what is so striking is that loss of faith isn't limited to one group. And often in an election, it's the party has lost the young, or they've lost pensioners, or they've lost a particular group. We spoke to people in very different groups last week, right down on the coast in Chichester, up to Edinburgh, in Scotland, Birmingham, Clacton, and it was the same message. We've just lost patience with the Conservatives. But I think the deeper challenge, and I think this is what Labour is going to inherit if they do win, if our polls and other polls are correct, is this sense that it isn't just about one party. And it's not just the usual apathy and cynicism, but something a bit deeper, this sense that after the past few years, people aren't convinced that any politician of any stripe can make a difference, that they're not up to the challenge. And we heard that time and time again from very different groups, very different backgrounds, that same sense of, will anything change, even though they really want it?
Do you think we've talked about this a little bit before. Could this be a low turnout election? Because at one level, when there is change in the air, that does tend to increase turnout a little bit, you would imagine. But if there is this apathy, might that be reflected in turnout? And do you have a sense of what a lower than expected turnout would do for the polls that we're seeing?
Yeah. I mean, it would not surprise me if this were a low turnout election, could be on a par with something like 2001, which was one of the lowest in recent times. And it does depend, as you say, on that. Does that time for change we just drive people out? And some people might be slightly holding their nose, but they're going out to vote for change. 7 in 10 people in surveys say they want change. Or does this sense it's not going to happen keep people at home? As for what it does, that's a really hard question. In fact, in polling world, it's far harder for us to work out the impact of different types of turnout than it is to work out who people are likely to vote for. There's one world in which, young progressive voters don't turn out, and maybe the Tories have a better result than expected. There's also another world where traditional Tories say, look, I'm not going to vote for Labour, but I'm so cross with the Conservatives, I'm just going to sit on my hand. And we saw that in 1997, actually. What made that result so catastrophic for the Conservatives wasn't just that people switched directly. It was actually lots of people who voted Conservative in 1992 saying, I'm not voting this time.
Do you buy the argument in the Times today? There's an anonymous quote from a cabinet minister, I think, saying Rishi getting us 140 to 180 MPs now would be a good result. in 97, you mentioned it, they won 165 seats. Is now the nadir of the 97 election the best possible scenario for the Tories in the 2024 election?
Well, it's certainly looking that way. In 1997, the Tories were 12.5 points behind Labour. Again, if the polls are correct, they're somewhere between sort of 16 and 22 points behind at the moment. So clawing back to, what was still a catastrophic defeat in 1997 for the Conservatives would now likely be seen as a good result. And there's a sort of perverse situation with all of these models showing Labour on course for majorities of 200-300 that a 1997 result could be seen as somewhat of a disappointment on election night.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll take it though. Even
I'm
even
sure.
so, just finally, the debate we're having this morning. We had Gunshaps on just before you, Luke, saying Labour's going to tax your home, your car, your job, your pension. We do get polls saying people don't mind high taxes or higher taxes if they're spent on public services. Yet no politician ever wants to say we'll tax you more and we'll spend more and you'll have a better country as a result of it. Why is there that cognitive dissonance in that area?
I think the challenge is you do get these polls, and there's no doubt the public seem more amenable to tax rises than they have in the past. They also think that both parties are going to put up taxes, whoever wins. They don't believe either Labour or the Conservatives are going to stick to their pledges. But I think the challenge is the public can be a little bit cakeist on this sometimes, which is they want higher tax rises. And then we've done a bit of work on taxes for who. And it tends to be taxes for the very rich, taxes for big business, not personal taxes. And of course, there's a good case for increasing taxes in lots of different areas. But the moment it starts to become about personal taxes, and particularly with the backdrop of the cost of living, I think you might find that some of that support for tax rises ebbing away.
Interesting stuff. Luke, great to speak to you. Thank you for joining us. That's Luke Tryl there from More in Common.
So many of you getting in touch about this tax bogeyman. Dave, Project Fear from Shaps regarding tax. It's okay for the Tories to impose the highest taxes since World War II upon us, but we shouldn't vote for Labour because they might tax us. Bananas, he says. And another one here, it's anonymous. It's not tax rises from Labour that put me off. I want a soundly and justly funded society. It's their lack of honesty.